had been driving the same ice cream truck route for nearly 3 summers, and nothing about it had ever felt particularly eventful. It was a routine job: drive the truck, play the jingle, serve ice cream to kids, and move on. The repetition suited me fine. That summer, though, something shifted. It started with a small change to the route. My boss, Sal, told me the company had expanded our service area to cover a few extra blocks near an industrial section of town, and I was expected to make one final stop there before wrapping up each day. The first time I drove through, I barely saw anyone around. It was the kind of area with low-rent apartments, a couple of rundown warehouses, and a stretch of road leading toward an abandoned lot. The few kids I did see were skittish, buying their ice cream quickly and running off without lingering. I chalked it up to shyness at first. But after a week, I noticed something strange. The same woman would always be standing at the far end of the street, watching. She never approached, never spoke, just watched. One evening, as I was closing up, a teenage boy knocked on the service window. He hesitated before speaking, then asked if I had noticed anything weird about this street. I asked him what he meant, and he just shook his head, saying I probably didn't want to know. Before I could press him for more, he handed me a crumpled bill, grabbed a popsicle, and jogged off. I watched as he disappeared behind one of the buildings. The next night, I lingered longer after my last sale, pretending to check my inventory while keeping an eye on the street. The woman was there again, just standing, and I felt something tighten in my stomach. Something wasn't right. I decided to drive away before she had a chance to get closer. A few nights later, my last customer was a little girl. She barely reached the counter and had to stretch to hand me her coins. Her hands were shaking. She asked if I could drive her home. I frowned, unsure of what to say. I told her I wasn't a taxi, but she pleaded, eyes darting toward the far end of the street. I followed her gaze and saw the woman again, except this time she had moved closer. I couldn't explain it, but something in the girl's expression told me she was terrified. I made a quick decision. I told the girl to hop in the passenger seat and started the truck, making a slow turn back toward the busier part of town. She didn't say a word, just sat there clutching her melting ice cream. When I finally asked where she lived, she just mumbled an address a few blocks away. I dropped her off and watched as she ran inside without looking back. I never saw her again. I started making excuses to skip that last stop, but Sal noticed and told me I needed to stick to my route. So, reluctantly, I kept going back. But each night, the tension grew. I started locking the service window as soon as the last kid left. I kept the engine running just in case. And still, the woman was always there, watching. Then one night, she wasn't alone. A second figure stood next to her, taller and bulkier. They were both facing my truck. I didn't wait to see what would happen. I slammed the truck into gear and took off, leaving behind a few unsold treats and a street full of questions I never wanted answered. The next day, I told Sal I was done with the job. He didn't ask why, just shrugged and said it was my call. As I walked out of the office, I checked my phone. There was a local news alert. Something about a missing girl, last seen near an industrial section of town. My stomach knotted. I knew I should have gone to the police, should have told someone about the girl who had been afraid to walk home. But I didn't. I still don't know what I saw or what was really happening in that part of town. I never paid much attention to the old ice cream truck that rolled through our neighborhood. It had been around since I was a kid, the kind of vehicle that seemed frozen in time, with faded decals and a jingle that played slightly off-key. I assumed it was run by the same guy all these years, though I never really saw his face, just a shadow behind the glass. That summer, I moved back home to take care of my dad after his surgery. The first week, I barely noticed the truck. But after a few nights, I realized something strange. It was still making its rounds long after dark. Ice cream trucks weren't supposed to operate at 10 or 11 at night, were they? The jingle echoed eerily through the quiet streets, stopping at corners where no one was waiting. One evening, I stepped onto the porch just as the truck crawled past my house. Its lights were dim, but the music blared loud enough to make my skin prickle. I peered at the driver's window, but once again, all I saw was a silhouette. I mentioned it to my neighbor, Mrs. Wilkes, an old woman who had lived on our block forever. She frowned and told me the truck had been coming around late for years. No one knew who ran it, but people had learned to ignore it. She warned me not to flag it down, said it was better not to interact. When I asked why, she just shook her head and changed the subject. That warning stuck with me. Still, curiosity got the better of me. The next night, when I heard the tune approaching, I waited by my front window. As the truck slowed near my house, I noticed something new. A kid was standing at the curb. A small boy in pajamas, barefoot, staring up at the truck. I didn't recognize him, and I was about to step outside when the truck's window slid open. I couldn't see what was said, but the boy hesitated, then climbed onto the step. He disappeared inside. The truck sat there for a few seconds, then drove off, the jingle still playing. I waited, expecting to see the kid reappear further down the street. He never did. The next morning, I checked the local news, but there were no reports of a missing child. I asked around, but none of the neighbors knew of any boy fitting his description. It gnawed at me for days. Every night, the truck returned, music looping endlessly, but I never saw another kid approach. Finally, I decided to follow it. I got in my car and trailed the truck as it weaved through town, always taking the same turns, never stopping at another house. After about 20 minutes, it left the neighborhood entirely, heading toward the old industrial district by the river. I kept my headlights off, trying to stay unnoticed. Then, as we reached a dead-end street lined with abandoned warehouses, the truck slowed and pulled onto a cracked asphalt lot. I parked at a distance and watched as the jingle cut off mid-note. The driver's door opened for the first time, and a figure stepped out. He was tall, wearing a heavy coat despite the summer heat. He moved toward the back of the truck, unlocking the rear doors. I craned my neck to see inside, expecting to spot crates of ice cream. But there were no ice cream crates, only rows of empty shelves and something else. Something that made my breath hitch. A child's shoe, lying on the floor. I left immediately, tires screeching as I turned back toward town. The truck's headlights flared behind me, but I didn't stop, didn't look back. When I reached my house, I locked the doors and sat in the dark, heart pounding. The truck never came back to my street after that night. I don't know if it moved on, or if whoever drove it had seen me watching. But I never reported it. Maybe I was afraid of what I'd find if I did. Maybe I just didn't want to know. I picked up the job driving an ice cream truck because it seemed easy. I'd done deliveries before, but this felt different, lighthearted even. Just handing out frozen treats to kids and making some extra cash for the summer. But like any job, the routine became mind-numbing fast. Same route, same faces, same jingling tune on repeat. I stopped noticing the people after a while, until one particular street caught my attention. It was in a quiet part of town, mostly residential, with little traffic. The first time I drove through, I spotted a boy standing by the curb. He looked about 10, wearing a striped red shirt and cargo shorts. His hand shot up as I slowed the truck. I took his money, handed him an ice cream, and drove off. Nothing unusual. But the next day he was there again, wearing the same clothes, standing in the exact same spot. He bought the same ice cream, same polite nod, same quiet demeanor. The repetition was odd, but I brushed it off. Maybe he just really liked ice cream. A week passed. Every day there he was, identical in every way. His posture, his expression, even the way he clutched the money in his small fist, started to make me uneasy. Kids changed, right? They wore different clothes, had different moods. But this kid never did. He was frozen in time. One afternoon, curiosity got the better of me. As I handed him his usual cone, I asked where he lived. He hesitated, looking past me, then mumbled the name of a street I didn't recognize. Something about the way he spoke sent a chill through me. It wasn't just the answer, it was how reluctant he was to give it. As if he wasn't sure. That night, I looked up the street name. It wasn't far, but when I drove by, all I found was an empty lot. No houses, no signs of life. Just cracked pavement and overgrown weeds. I felt something crawl up my spine. I had to be mistaken. Maybe he misspoke. The next day, I stopped the truck at the usual spot and waited. The boy wasn't there. I sat for a few minutes, glancing around, expecting him to appear. But he never did. I should have felt relieved, but the silence gnawed at me. The absence felt wrong. That evening, as I was closing up, I saw him again. But this time, he wasn't on the usual street. He was standing near the entrance of a park, watching me. His hands were empty. No money, no sign he wanted ice cream. Just staring. The second I made eye contact, he turned and walked away. I don't know why, but I followed. I left the truck running and stepped onto the sidewalk, calling out to him. He didn't look back. He just kept walking, deeper into the park, until the trees swallowed him. I hesitated, then jogged after him, the shadows stretching long in the fading daylight. I lost him near an old playground. No footsteps, no rustling leaves. Just gone. The air was thick with something I couldn't name. Then I noticed something half buried in the dirt near a rusted swing set. It was an ice cream wrapper, faded and brittle. The same brand I sold. When I picked it up, I saw something else beneath it. Something small and made of plastic. I wiped away the dirt and felt my breath hitch. It was a keychain. A tiny red sneaker. The next day, I asked around the neighborhood. No one seemed to remember a boy matching his description. An older woman across the street said the last family with a child had moved away years ago. When I mentioned the street name he had given me, she frowned. Said the houses there had been demolished after a fire decades ago.